Good morning. بس ما بحكي انجليزي. اوكي، صباح الخير. اولا يعني اسمحوا لي اعتذر عن هذا التاخير بسبب نحن نعيش في حاله انتخابات وصعب جدا التعامل مع الدخول الى الجامعه مع تجهيزات للترجمه، فهذا سبب التاخير الاساسي. اهلا وسهلا بكم باسم معهد الاصفري للمواطنة للمجتمع المدني والمواطنة في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت، وباسم مديرته الدكتورة دينا خواجة. أرحب بكم في هذا اللقاء العلمي، وأتمنى لكم عملا مثمرا مع ضيوفنا الذين سيعرفون عن نفسهم مباشرة بعد الآن. أريد فقط أن أقول ملاحظتين لو سمحتم. أولا، الترجمة متاحة إنجليزية عربية لمن يريد. وثانيا، هناك تصوير، نحن مضطرون في المعهد لتصوير كل فعالياتنا العلمية، فالتصوير لابد منه. إن كان منكم من لا يريد أن يظهر في الصورة، فالرجاء أن يرفع معبرا عن نفسه حتى نبعد الكاميرا عن وجهه. أنيس صحيح؟ نعم. أوكي، شكرا لكم. كريستين.
Thank you. My name is Kirsten Ainley. I'm from the London School of Economics, and we are co-hosting the event today. I want to say first a very big thank you to the Safari Institute for hosting us, and incredible gratitude for everything that has been done to organise this day. And also to say just a word about the network that this event is part of. We received some funding a few years ago through the London School of Economics to put together a research network of academics and human rights practitioners, researchers, activists, to look at the relationships between conflict, justice and development in 4 different case study sites in Sri Lanka, in Colombia, in Uganda and in Syria. We have met in Colombia, in Uganda and in Sri Lanka, and this is our final meeting to discuss the conflict in Syria, the development challenges that leads to, the justice, the work that's being done on justice within the conflict, and the potential for justice and development when the conflict finishes. So we have a range of guests, and through the network with each of the events that we've held, we've asked for a range of guests with a range of different perspectives. The programme today looks extremely exciting, and AUB and Dareen Khalifa, who is on the network, have put a lot of work into organising it. I'm very excited to get underway and hear the speakers' perspectives. So I think I'll leave it there and hand over now to Dr. Rebecca Friedman from King's University in London, who will chair the first panel.
Sorry.
There
okay.
you go.
It was working before and then seemed to have lost it temporarily. So thank you very much. My name is Rebecca Friedman, and I'm very happy to be chairing this session. I also want to quickly thank AUB and Dr. Hassan, Dr. Khawaja, for all their help in putting this together. Before we introduce the panel and the speakers, we thought that we would go around the room and all introduce ourselves very briefly. So perhaps we can start at this side, and then we'll finish with the speakers and the panel. So thank you. It seems to just work one at a time, so you'll have to push it longer individually.
Hi, my name is
Emmanuel Durand, and I'm doing a PhD in anthropology on Syrian urban markets here in Beirut. My name is Emma Aubin-Boltanski. I'm working here. I'm also an anthropologist. I'm working here at the ISPO, the French Institute of the Near East, and I'm working on women issues related to the Syrian conflict.
We need to try and make the microphone.
Sorry, you did not hear me.
Is it too quiet back there?
No, the translator can't hear.
Oh.
I think that's all right for the introduction. We need to fix it afterwards.
Okay, Rola Rikbi, مديرة Women Now for Development in Lebanon. Agnès Favier, researcher at the European University Institute in Florence, and I'm based here.
Frances Topham Smallwood, I'm a researcher looking at Syria and civil society.
Nareem Khalifa, I work for the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue focusing on Syria.
Chandra Sriram, University of East London. I work on human rights and peace building. Kirsten Ainley, International Relations Department at LSE.
Firas Dahi from Citizenship.
Firas
Firas Dahi, lawyer from Citizenship League.
Ali from Citizenship. Khaled from Citizenship League.
Ahmed Sukkar, Menon postdoctoral fellow at AUB.
Eric Wiebelhaus-Braun, a professor at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock in the United States.
My name is Espen Stokke. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Bergen in Norway.
Hi, Camilo Sanchez. I'm an associate professor of law at National University in Colombia.
Good morning. I'm a student from Makerere University, Kampala, Uganda.
Ammar Bajbouj, visiting research fellow, King's College London.
I am Shahla Sharafuddin from Damascus University. I'm architect.
Roa Sharafuddin, doctor at Damascus University.
Mark Kirsten, YAMO Foundation at the University of Toronto. Thank you.
Ali, English, studying English translation.
Isra Hadla Hassan, student at Lebanese University.
Stephen Ola from Uganda, Director of Manning Institute, Uganda.
Mohamed Sisse from McGill University. I work on post-conflict peace building and reconstruction in West Africa.
Good morning. Mario Gomez from the International Center for Ethnic Studies in Sri Lanka.
My name is Irene Tutsi. I'm a PhD student from Sapienza University of Rome and Humboldt University of Berlin, currently visiting here at LAU University.
موريس عايق بيشتغل بقطاع التنمية الإعلامية مع BBC Media Action.
هنا الشرف رابطة المواطن Citizenship League.
عمر الباعي مثل
أنا صباح الحلاق مثلهم رابطة المواطن حزب قضايا
My name is Anna Fleischer. I'm with Women Now for Development, a women's organization working with Syrian refugees.
And my name is Rebecca Friedman, and I'm assistant professor at King's College London in the War Studies Department. So we have.
لا إذا ما اشتغل المايكروفون ما
ما نسمع
We'll just pass this one around too. Okay, so we have two speakers on this panel this morning. We will reverse the order on the program. No, we're sticking to it now, we corrected it. So we'll start with Ms. Saba Al-Halak and then Anna Fleischer. So we'll do 20 minutes each.
هأحكي بالعربي. يسعد صباحكم.
وصباح سوريا وصباح كل السوريين بالشتات. الوضع كتير ما كنت بفضل أنا بلش أحكي، كنت بفضل تحكي آن إذا كانت تحكي بشكل عام على النزاعات المسلحة وأثرها على النساء، لكن فضلنا إنه ممكن البداية سوريا. عم نحكي عن سوريا فما حتكون مشرقة ولا متفائلة، بالعكس ملطخة باللون الأحمر. الورقة حتحكي عن العدالة من أجل الجميع في سوريا ومن أجل استدامة الحل السياسي لسوريا. أكثر من 7 سنوات مرت على بداية الثورة السورية ومن ثم تحولت إلى نزاع مسلح. هذا النزاع ذهب ضحيته عشرات الآلاف من المدنيين نساء ورجالا. شرد ملايين السوريين والسوريات خارج مناطق سكناهم سواء في داخل سوريا أو خارج سوريا. هذا عدا عن معاناة الاعتقال والموت تحت التعذيب والخطف والجوع وفقدان حاجيات العيش الأساسية. أين النساء ضمن هذا الوضع؟ النساء السوريات دفعت مثل ما دفعت الكثير من النساء في دول النزاع المسلحة أثمان باهظة لهذا النزاع، وهذا ليس كلام نعبر عنه تعبيرا يعني صحفيا أو إعلاميا، إنما هو موثق عبر تقارير وأبحاث دولية وأممية. آلاف النساء اعتقلت واختطفت والكثير منهن أخذن كرهائن حرب. الاغتصاب تم توثيقه على أنه جريمة وجرى بشكل ممنهج. عندما نقول ممنهج يعرف كل من يعمل في القانون الدولي ماذا يعني في سياق النزاع المسلح. نتساءل هل هناك بيئة قانونية واجتماعية وشرعية مهدت وكانت سببا من أسباب هذا الثمن الغالي الذي دفعته نساؤنا السوريات؟ يوجد في سوريا بيئة قانونية تمييزية سواء في قوانين الأحوال الشخصية 6 التي تتحكم بحياة أفراد الأسرة السورية، من القانون العام السوري قانون الأحوال الشخصية إلى قوانين الأحوال الشخصية التابعة للطوائف المسيحية إلى الفقرات المتعلقة بطائفة الدروز. كل هذه القوانين تعطي الولاية لرجال العائلة، وحتى لو فقدنا رأس العائلة كما يقال في القوانين تذهب الولاية إلى ذكور العائلة للأب وليس للأم. فهذا يعني تأسيساً أن المرأة هي قاصر لا يمكن لها أن تتولى ولاية نفسها ولا الولاية على أولادها. هذا كله سينعكس الآن في ما يسمى إذا حصل في سوريا مسارات العدالة الانتقالية. وأيضاً هناك هذا التمييز في قانون الجنسية، تمييز في قانون العقوبات، حيث يشرع قتل النساء في العائلات تحت ما يسمى بدافع الشرف والمعروف بجرائم الشرف، حتى يشرع اغتصاب الزوجات في نص قانوني واضح عندما يقول أن لا عقوبة لمن يرغم زوجته على ممارسة الجنس معه، فهذا اغتصاب زوجي. هنالك الكثير من المواد القانونية التمييزية، وقد تخلت الحكومات السورية عن مهمتها في تنظيم العلاقات ما بين أفراد الأسر وتركتها للمراجع الدينية، وهذا أسس لتمييز قائم لعنف قائم. لم ترعى الحكومات السورية المتعاقبة ليومنا هذا ما هو العنف ضد النساء. لا يوجد مأوى للنساء المعنفات، لا يوجد قانون لحماية النساء المعنفات. هذا ما نتحدث عنه ما قبل 2011، فما بالنا اليوم ونحن نعرف أن أشكال العنف التي تعرضت لها النساء السوريات نقرأ عنها أحيانا في كتب تاريخية، أحيانا نشاهدها في الأفلام، لكن ما وقع على النساء السوريات وصل إلى حد الاستعباد الجنسي. وكل من طلع على ما جرى للنساء السوريات في شبكة الاتجار بالبشر التي كشفت في 2016 في لبنان يعرف كل أشكال العنف التي تعرضت لها النساء السوريات. لقد استخدمت النساء السوريات كأداة حرب من قبل جميع الأطراف. طبعا هناك من التقارير الدولية دائما تركز على أن النظام السوري هو يتحمل من الجرائم المرتكبة بحق السوريين والسوريات جميعا يعني الجرم الأكبر، ولكن أيضا للأسف كل الأطراف دون استثناء استخدمت النساء وقامت بجرائم حرب. وآخرها كلكم تابعتوا ما جرى في لدى جيش الإسلام، وهناك مختطفين ومختطفات من مناطق عدرا العمالية، وأيضا من مختطفات مناطق في ريف اللاذقية. إذن استخدمت النساء كأداة حرب واستخدمت في رهائن. وهناك من التقارير ما يؤشر إلى أن مراكز سجون الاعتقال العلنية، يعني سجن عدرا، سجن حماة، سجن لادية، يعني الأماكن التي يمكن الوصول للمعلومات، هناك 90% من النساء المعتقلات لا علاقة لهم على الإطلاق، لم يشاركنا مشاركة فعلية، ولكن أخذوا رهائن عن ذكور عائلتهم. كيف يمكن لنا أن نعمل من أجل أن تكون العدالة ومسار العدالة الانتقالية في سوريا معني في تحقيق حقوق هؤلاء النساء جميعاً، وأيضاً في أن يستدام السلام؟ لأن ما أظهرته التقارير الدولية والقرارات الدولية، وبخاصة 1325 وبخاصة سيداو والتوصيات ذات العلاقة بالنزاع المسلح، تبين أن هذه القرارات جاءت نتيجة أثمان باهظة دفعتها النساء في دول النزاعات المسلحة. وهذا المؤتمر أعتقد من المؤتمرات الغنية التي سنسمع تجارب الدول التي عانت من النزاع المسلح وما هي الآليات التي استخدمت. هل كانت هذه الآليات حساسة للجندر، حساسة لحقوق النساء، حساسة لاستدامة سلام تشارك به النساء والرجال معا؟ نحن كنساء سوريات، وأخص الآن النسويات اللواتي عملنا منذ ما قبل 2011 على مطالبة بتعديل القوانين التمييزية، المطالبة بوضع قانون لحماية النساء من العنف الأسري منذ 2005، وهو منجز هذا القانون ولكنه موضوع بالدرج. عملنا كثيراً على المطالبة بكل حذف كل التمييز الموجود في كل القوانين التي ذكرتها. إلى يومنا هذا لا يوجد أي تعديل لهذه القوانين. اعتمدنا على اتفاقية سيداو إلغاء جميع أشكال التمييز ضد المرأة، ولكن للأسف ما زالت التحفظات على هذه الاتفاقية تفرغ الاتفاقية من محتواها. وما أظهره النظام في رفع التحفظ عن المادة الثانية للأسف ربطه بأن لا يخالف الشريعة الإسلامية. نحن نعمل باتجاه دولة مواطنة، باتجاه أن يشعر السوريين والسوريات بغض النظر عن دينهم وطائفتهم وقوميتهم أنهم معنيون بهذا البلد، وبأن الدستور يجب أن ينص نصا صريحا وواضحا على المساواة التامة بين السوريين والسوريات جميعا بغض النظر عن دينهم، طائفتهم، قوميتهم وعرقهم وإلى آخره. فكيف إذا اعتمدنا على الشريعة الإسلامية أن تكون النص الواضح والصريح أن لا يخالف شيء؟ بصراحة عندما نعلق المسائل والقضايا الهامة بالحريات وبالمواطنة، عندما نعتمد على الشرائع، فنحن نضرب بعرض الحائط هذه الحقوق وهذه الحريات. لذلك نحن معنيين عندما نتحدث كنسويات عن الدستور أن لا يكفي على الإطلاق أن ننص على المساواة التامة بين النساء والرجال. لا يكفي على الإطلاق أن نقول بعدم التمييز بين النساء والرجال. لا يكفي أيضا على تجريم كل أشكال العنف ضد النساء. ينبغي على الدستور أن ينص أنه دولة مواطنة، أنه دولة قانون. دولة المواطنة ودولة القانون هي الضامن الأساسي لكل السوريين كمواطنين ومواطنات. من هنا يأتي الدور الذي يجب أن تلعبه النساء السوريات، وقد لعبت كثيرا. وللفخر أن أقول أن النساء السوريات تعلمنا من تجارب النساء اللواتي تعرضنا بدولهم لنزاعات مسلحة. لقد بادرنا بإصدار وثائق هامة جدا، أولها ب2013 كانت المبادئ المؤسسة للدستور وحقوق النساء. ثانيها كيف يكون الدستور جندريا. ثالثها ما أصدرته رابطة المواطنة في دليل المواطنة، الجندر والمواطنة. هذا مهم جدا أننا نرتكز على أهم من المبادئ الأربع للمواطنة، وهي المساواة. فنحن نعي ما نريده لسوريتنا القادمة، سورية السلام المستدام. ماذا فعلنا كنساء سوريات؟ طالبنا منذ 2013 كل المبعوثين الدوليين ابتداء من الأخضر الإبراهيمي انتهاء بديمستورا على ضرورة مشاركتنا على طاولة المفاوضات كنسويات ونسبة 30%. طالبنا أن نكون من الخبيرات في لجان الخبراء حول طاولة المفاوضات. طالبنا على إشراك المجتمع المدني على طاولة المفاوضات وأيضا ضمن الخبرات. لقد تحقق البعض القليل، ولكن نجده درسا إيجابيا. هناك نساء في طرفي التفاوض، وزادت الآن 3 نساء في وفد المعارضة السياسية نتيجة أيضا حركة نسوية سياسية في باريس العام الماضي استطاعت أن تتواصل مع قوى المعارضة وتزيد من نسبة تمثيلها. صدرت وثيقة هيئة التفاوض، وكان ضمن هذه الوثيقة نص واضح وصريح على تمثيل النساء 30%. هناك جسم نسوي يرعى قضايا الجندر وحقوق النساء تحت مسمى المجلس الاستشاري النسوي. هناك نسبة مشاركة للنساء في غرفة المجتمع المدني 44%. هناك مشاركة نسوية في مجموعة الدستور. هناك حث المنظمات المجتمع المدني على إشراك النساء في مواقع صنع القرار. إذن حققنا القليل وما زلنا نناضل، وهو نضال حقيقي من أجل تمثيل النساء ووضعهم على وضع قضاياهم على أجندة الحل السياسي. الآن ماذا فعلنا أيضا؟ ماذا نريد أيضا؟ نريد حلا سياسيا مستدام، حلا لجميع السوريين والسوريات، وليس اتفاق بين أمراء حرب. نحن لا نعود إلى انتصارات العسكرية، لا تهمنا على الإطلاق كمدنيين. ليس هناك منتصر في سوريا، ليس هناك حلا عسكريا لسوريا. يجب أن يكون الحل سياسي، يجب أن يكون سلام مستدام. وأن لم تشارك النساء في هذا الحل وتضع كل ما يلزم لدولة مواطنة ودولة القانون، فليس هناك سلاما مستداما. ماذا سيحل بالنساء اللواتي فقدن أزواجهن ضمن المنظومة القانونية والشرعية لسوريا؟ الإرث في سوريا نص قانوني واضح في قانون الأحوال الشخصية العام أن المرأة ترث نصف حصة الرجل، فهي منقوصة نصف، للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين. ولكن في العادات والتقاليد وفي أبحاث أجرتها رابطة النساء السوريات تبين أن معظم النساء السوريات تحرم حتى من هذه الحصة المنقوصة نتيجة عادات وتقاليد كرست في سوريا في جميع الأرياف، في أغلبية الريف ولدى جميع الطوائف والقوميات. إذن ماذا سيحصل لهؤلاء النساء عند التعويضات؟ هل فقدان الرجل يعني أن ومعظم الملكيات هي باسم الرجال، وهذا ما نعرفه تماما عندما نعمل مع اللاجئات؟ معظم النساء لا توجد ملكية بأسمائهم. ما هو الحل في حال التعويضات؟ يجب أن ينص ويصدر قانون أو قرار على أن النساء تعوض مباشرة بسكن. هذا أول مطلب، لا تبقى النساء ضمن حيز القانون الغير المنصف التمييزي ولا الشرع. ثانياً، يجب أخذ بعين الاعتبار مشاركة النساء ليس فقط في الحكومة، إنما بصياغة الدستور، بصياغة القوانين، وأيضاً بلجان المصالحة وبلجان الحقيقة. من أصعب المسائل هي المحاسبة. هناك معروف لديكم أن هناك عدد من الجرائم عندما ترتكب بالنزاع المسلح تعتبر جرائم حرب، ومن حق هؤلاء النساء أن يصلن إلى العدالة، وهذه العدالة يجب أن تحدث في سوريا، لأن الكثير من الضحايا لا يمكن أن يعافوا مما حدث لهم إذا لم يصلوا إلى العدالة. وهذا عملنا نحن معا جميعا، رجالا ونساء، سوريين وسوريات، وأيضا المجتمع الدولي، أن يصل السوريون جميعا إلى العدالة. وشكرا.
Thank you very much.
We have a change.
بس شغال.
It's okay.
Okay.
Pleasure again, about 20 minutes.
Oh, زيدون. What should I do for the Skype call? Someone who's gonna speak later. Okay. Because we're running a little bit late. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Sabah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Fleischer, as I said briefly earlier, but without a microphone, so I'm going to say it again. I am with an organization called Women Now for Development. I would like to frame my intervention as a practitioner in the field. I'm not currently a researcher, so bear with me if it's not. If something is not clear, or if you have more questions, I'm very happy to discuss them after.
Just to give you a brief introduction about the organization and about our approach. So Women Now for Development is an organization run by Syrian women for Syrian women. So I am not a representative of this of this organization very well, but we have a lot of women who are running activities for other women. Basically, we run safe spaces for women for education, psychosocial support, and leadership trainings. I would like to focus on the approach that we take to women empowerment and how this plays out on the local level, after Sabah gave a very good overview of the larger political developments in the larger sort of context of Syrian women's rights and the challenges that Syrian women face in getting their rights on a daily basis. I think that was a very good overview. I would like to focus on kind of the local level. So one of the challenges that we see is the fact that we have a very big gap between the local women's activism, women who are working in running activities in civil society, women who are running small businesses, women who are active in all fields of society, who are facing a lot of challenges on a daily basis, displacements, bombing, attacks, and so on and so forth, who are really struggling through their daily, the violent conflict that they're experiencing. And then we are seeing a very high level representation that Sabah was referring to on a Geneva level, for example, where you have Syrian women who are fighting to be represented at the negotiation tables, trying to make sure that women's demands are heard on a high level negotiation level. But we are lacking a sort of link in between. There's a very big gap between a woman who's suffering through the armed conflict on a daily basis and trying to keep a sustained activities for the community, and the one who is sitting at the table in Geneva. And also the demands are different, the needs are different. So we are seeing a sort of lack of a platform in between, and here's where our work comes in, based on doing participation programs for women. So we try to be a platform for those voices of the women who are on a daily basis suffering through very difficult circumstances and lack a platform for their voices to be heard. I'll give you an example. The recent developments in Eastern Ghouta, I'm not sure how much you talked about what happened, but recently we had 3 women's centers in Eastern Ghouta. 2 of them were bombed and completely destroyed. And with the current displacement that was ongoing, we had to stop our activities in Eastern Ghouta, unfortunately. Basically what happened here is that the women were the ones who were writing stories from the basements, because the military assault on Eastern Ghouta took weeks and was very heavy, to a degree that people were hiding in basements, were hiding in shelters, hiding underground because they could not go out. So what happened in this circumstance, because the men were trying to, those men who are still left in Eastern Ghouta, I have to say, were trying to deal with the situation, and the women were very much left writing testimonies and writing stories and publishing them online. And one of the things that we did was we translated them to English and we published them very widely, and we tried to really highlight the struggles that the women go through. One of the messages we received was of a woman giving birth in a shelter without medical staff, without any medical supplies, and we received messages from our team inside asking, how do I help to give birth? Because if you're not a medical professional, you don't know. Another example is the fact of lack of female hygiene products. Eastern Ghouta was besieged for years, and it was extremely difficult to get any female hygiene products into the area. And if you could buy it, you would buy a single one for an extortionary price. So women had to rely on very archaic methods for their personal female hygiene. And it's a very difficult issue because it's attached to a lot of social taboos, and it has a lot of shame around it. So women don't really talk about these issues. But we were talking about the challenges that women face under siege, under bombardment, how to get, for example, clean water and personal hygiene products for women. So what we are trying to highlight is the local struggles that women are going through, the very specific struggles also according to the region that the women are in, because obviously the situation differs. One of the things that is very important for us, just to go back for a second, as sort of explaining the approach, one of the challenges that we see in Syria is that a majority of the funding for international development projects goes to women projects. There's a research done by an organization called Citizens for Syria where they mapped all the activities inside Syria, all the projects and so on and so forth. A majority of projects is targeted at women, but is not run by women. It's actually a minority of projects that are run by women. So who's doing women's programming? Who's writing the programming? Who's implementing? And who is really in charge of these programs? It's rarely ever Syrian women themselves. So one of the things that is very important for us is community mobilization from the women themselves, because who knows their needs better than themselves? Who can better design a program and who can better design a space than the women themselves? And this is one of the things that's very important for us to highlight, because this is where the power comes from doing projects on the ground and trying to help the communities, because they are very well aware of their needs. Also, the women have a medium to long-term view of the situation. When we asked women in Idlib 5 years ago what they need, and this is already 2 years into the armed conflict, you would think that they would say, we need food or water or shelter or so on and so forth. But what they told us is we need education for our children. This is what they said. We need a curriculum, we need continued education programs, and despite all the difficult circumstances, children need to keep going to school. And what we are seeing now, 5 years later, that those children are now young men. And this is where we face a lot of challenges if young men are not in education, if they are not having any chance to make a living for their family. We have a very difficult situation on the ground with all the armed groups who are already there, with the military assaults that are ongoing. So it's a very difficult situation if these demands are not heard. We are talking also about the fact that women are a link between the private and the public space. So what we are seeing, for example, is the fact that women know very well about the demands and sort of the needs of the family in the private space, because they are acutely aware and taking care of the children, taking care of their children's education, trying to help their children further their education. And at the same time, they know very well about the challenges that they face outside of the home. I will give you an example of women in Idlib. About 6 weeks ago, there was a statement published by over 20 women's organizations that are active in Idlib, which is one of the areas that now we have over 1.5 million IDPs in this region from the recent displacement, from the displacements that already happened, and especially also now from Eastern Ghouta. A lot of people have been displaced internally to Idlib. It's an area that is already being bombed. There's already an assault ongoing, and also at the same time we're facing a lot of issues. For example, now we have the threat of measles breaking out in the camps. Like, there are a lot of challenges now because the infrastructure and the resources are extremely strained from the large number of IDPs who are arriving there. So these women's groups got together and published a statement where they demanded not to recognize any military factions or government affiliated factions, any armed factions, and this is something that Sabah spoke about. This focus in the Syrian context on the militarized and the securitized discussion always silences women's voices. They call for the independence of their institutions, organizations, and women associations as civic entities. They do not want any armed group or any military to enter in the civic activities of their associations or of their groups. They also have a continued demand to protect civilians in all areas of Syria. So what this example is for me is to bring you an example of very local activism. This was a statement that was published in Arabic, and we then published it in English because we missed this link of the local activism that is mostly published and done in Arabic, and then to translate it to an international stage, to make people aware of the fact that there are many very active women's associations in Idlib who protest, who stand in solidarity with other women all over Syria, who organize, who are still active. Okay, this is one of the things I would really like to highlight to you, that there is still civic activism in Syria. There is still people who are mobilizing on a community level and trying to do something useful and peaceful for their communities. One other example I would like to give you is a movement focusing on detainees and forcibly disappeared called the Families for Freedom. This is a movement that is women-led by Syrian women who have all lost someone to detention or enforced disappearance from their immediate family, their husbands, brothers, sons, who are now mobilizing on the issue of detention and enforced disappearance in Syria. The issue of detention is a huge problem. We are now trying to really see the numbers. The estimates are saying that there are 200,000 detainees, but anyone I speak to who knows about the issue thinks the numbers are much higher. But the problem is we don't have any concrete numbers until now, unfortunately. The detention is a tactic that's long been used by the government to silence those voices that were not wanted. I mean, this has been happening for decades. But with the uprising in 2011, detention skyrocketed. The numbers of detention skyrocketed. People were detained for all kinds of reasons, for demonstrating, for distributing aid. There's lots of reasons for arbitrary detention of civilian and peaceful civilians. So one of the things that these women are trying to do is they're trying to break the silence around this issue because everyone is scared to talk about this issue for fear of repercussion of the person who's in detention. So anyone who speaks publicly about their loved one being detained fears repercussions for their loved one in detention. But these women are now speaking up publicly in Geneva. They tried to go to Astana, they were not allowed to go. They are mobilizing with other families in order to break the silence around this issue and ask for all sides of the conflict. It's not about one side of the conflict, it's all sides of the conflict, detained civilians, and they're asking for fair trials, for improvement of detention facilities, and for no military courts, because this is a problem that there are no civilian procedures. Why am I giving you this example? Because we consider detention and mass detention a form of violence against women. And here's where I connect to what Sabah was saying. When you take the male head of household out of a Syrian family, you virtually paralyze the family unit as a whole. Women are not able to remarry. Women are not able to inherit. They're not able to even move very freely with their children if the male head of household is removed without any kind of paper given to you. So the problem is that if he's in detention or if he's disappeared, you do not have any papers to prove where he is, or maybe he's deceased. This is an issue that affects really the whole society. Because of course the majority of detainees is male, even though there are a lot of also female detainees, but we are considering it as a form of violence against women because you paralyze the entire family unit by taking out the male head of household. So the Families for Freedom are an example of women mobilizing around an issue that is highly sensitive, that is very difficult to talk about, but they are bridging the gaps between different sides of the conflict. They are talking to people who have detainees from all sides. And this is something that I think is a powerful example of how, when women mobilize, how they can bridge gaps and how they can also address things that are very, very sensitive because they are coming from a humane perspective. They're not talking about military. They are not talking about arms. They are not talking about these things. They are trying to address mothers, sisters, daughters, sons, brothers, because it's something that affects all people equally, no matter what side of the conflict you're on. One last example that I would like to raise coming from Sabah's intervention is something that was called the civilian bloc in Eastern Ghouta. That was a group of activists and civil society and academics and different people who tried to enter local negotiations on when Eastern Ghouta was falling, trying to bring civilians' demands to the table. And also here, women's voices are direly unheard. unfortunately. No side of the conflict, no armed group, not the Syrian government, not the international community, nobody was willing to listen to the civilian bloc and to their demands. Because we are now in a situation, as I said, where the discussions around Syria are so highly militarized that civilian voices are completely lost in the shuffle. And here's also where we see a great opportunity for Syrian women to speak up and to have their voices heard on all platforms and fora, be it regional, be it local, be it international, because the messages that they carry are touching as well the private space as well as the public space, and bridging this divide and trying to bring the civilian messages to the table of negotiation or the discussions around it, to research, to media, to all outlets, because they are not, unfortunately, often not heard. For us, and something that is important, I think, to add to what was already said, is the fact that we also have to discuss women empowerment as a holistic approach. The example I gave you of Syrian women's programs being run mostly by men or designed mostly by men also means that a lot of women empowerment programs in the international development sector are, for example, a workshop, a knitting workshop or a stitching workshop, or like some type of vocational training. But we do not see this as a holistic approach to women empowerment. For us, it's not enough to teach a woman a skill. You also need to build her self-confidence through, for example, psychosocial support, helping her through the trauma of war, helping her through the trauma of losing loved ones, of having an uncertain future, and also building her soft skills and her leadership skills, and having women able to participate in public life, giving her the proper tools to be able to talk about her demands, formulate her demands, deal with other people, go out and mobilize others as well. And this is something that is, unfortunately, in our view, often lacking in women empowerment programs. That you really look at it as a holistic approach rather than just a vocational training program, or like being very partial on the issue. So I'll leave it here, and I'm glad to discuss more with you. Thank you.
Thank you for two extremely rich and thoughtful presentations. We all learned a lot. We only have a short period of time, so we'll go straight to questions. We'll collect a few, and then we'll give the speakers a chance to respond. So, yeah, Darine.
Well, thank you so much for these amazing presentations and for the great work you're doing. It's incredibly eye-opening. I have two very quick questions. One is, well, we had some meetings in Istanbul, also Syrian civil society organizations, and in one of the presentations, I think a representative from the local administrative unit said the female representation in local council is quite low, and then when we asked, he said as in 0%, which is shameful not only for the local councils, but also for donors supporting them. So I just wanted to ask you if you are working at all in trying to A, pressure the donors, B, pressure the local representatives in these councils to carve space for women. That's one. My second question is related more to the political process, and I just wanted to ask if you think the Women Advisory Board in Geneva is at all effective, and if not, then how can we give it a bigger role? And how do you see the future of it? Thank you.
Thanks for the presentations. I have a question for both panelists.
I think we have to push it again, otherwise
Just one.
perhaps try the one that's not. I think you have to hold it for a short period of time.
Yes, my question is for both panelists. It seems to me that in your presentations, you emphasize a lot the victimhood experience of women in the conflict in Syria. And I understand that women in conflict and violence situations often suffer disproportionately, and some of the crimes and violations they target women. But I was just wondering whether there are women that are also involved in combat in Syria. What are their experiences in using violence to protest against the regime or foreign invaders in the country? And what also are their experience in coming back into their societies? For instance, reintegrating into their society when you have a cessation of hostility.
صباح حكيتي إنه نساء السوريات استفدنا من تجارب نساء بدول تانية عاشت نزاعات، بس إذا بلمحة سريعة شو هي المواضيع أو شو هي القطاعات اللي استفدنا منها؟ قانوني، تشبيك، جمعيات، يعني بس شو وجه الاستفادة تحديدا؟
شكرا جزيلا. أيضا سؤالي للسيدة صباح، حقيقة أول شيء شكرا على التقديم الجميل. يعني بالنسبة لموضوع مطالبة حضرتك بدستور يضمن حقوق المواطنة، هلا نحن بنعرف الدساتير السورية من دستور 1950 إلى دستور 53 على في عهد الشيشكلي، حتى دستور الوحدة مع مصر، وحتى الدساتير الحالية رغم كافة الانتقادات الموجهة إليها هي تدعو إلى موضوع المواطنة والمساواة وحقوق المرأة وغيرها، لكن لم نجد هناك تنفيذ على مختلف هذه الدساتير لما هو موجود. يعني حتى أنه الدساتير أصبحت عبارة عن حبر على ورق. فشو برأيك هي الآليات اللي نحن ممكن ننفذ فيها نصوص هذه الدساتير بغض النظر عن وجود النصوص التي تدعم المساواة أم لا؟ يعني يبدو أن الخلل في آلية تنفيذ هذه الدساتير. شكرا.
Yeah, I'd like to start with the local council question. The representation of women in local councils is not zero, but it is nearing zero. There are very few. Local councils are not designed by their nature in Syria to be spaces for women. Why? Because they are not voted on, but they are chosen after Friday prayers when the men are already together. So it's not a space that is already kind of inducive to women engagement. I'll give you an example from local level mobilization. One of our center managers of one of the women's spaces that we run was becoming so known in the community for her work and how she was helping other women and so on, that the local council actually asked her to be on the council itself. Because she gained herself a reputation for being someone in the community that is helping other women. She refused to be part of the council and instead suggested to the council to establish a women advisory inside the council with other women because she did not want to be part of it herself as we call it with the window dressing woman, like that one woman who is there but she's not really able to participate fully. But she suggested to them to have more than one woman in an advisory capacity inside the local council to advise the men on women's issues, because these men were not aware of what are the needs of the women in the community, what kind of support they need, what are their demands. So this is a very local example of how women are engaged in the local level. For me, as a larger phenomenon, so to speak, and what you are talking about, I think you are completely right. And I do think that donors have a responsibility to demand women being parts of the projects that they fund. I think it's something that should be done. And I am surprised that it's not done because, for example, the EU prides itself on gender mainstreaming and prides itself on gender being, an aspect that they include in all of their programming. But when you look at it on the ground, it's very different. And actually, I think it's also an important aspect to look at women as very active members of these projects rather than just beneficiaries or like recipients of aid. And we look at women as rights holders, as stakeholders in their own activities. And this, once you shift this perception, it really changes how you look at the projects that are being done with women. So yes, I agree with you. It should be something that is being pushed, especially by people who are in a position to push it. For the Women's Advisory Board, I think that it is a useful tool. The problem is that right now there are no negotiations. So we are in a deadlock situation where nothing is really happening. So also the women's participation on the table is, is in danger because we are not right now not having any kind of moving negotiations or something that is happening. We believe in the Geneva process, and because it's the one process that Syrian civil society has access to. All other negotiations are blocked for Syrian civil society. I mean, in Astana, everyone who has ever fired a gun has earned the right to sit at the table, whereas peaceful activists and women activists were not allowed. So I think we need to work on the tools that we have. We need to broaden the scope, and this is something that Sabah was talking about. I don't think it's enough, and I think we need to keep pushing for more women representation and effective women representation. And this is one of our criticisms towards the Geneva process, is that the forms of participation are very narrow. You need to be, for example, a registered NGO to participate. You need to have certain, like let's say the boxes, the pre-formed boxes that civil society needs to fit in were formed decades ago. But we are now looking at a different type of activism, we're looking at a different type of conflict, and we need new forms of participation at the international level in order for example, movements to be able to speak up, for women's initiatives, for example, to be able to be heard. But unfortunately, the forms of participation are quite static. Okay, it's not very fluid. So it's still a very sort of static form of participation for Syrian civil society. I think I'll leave it here.
Do you want to reply?
نادين، بس أنا حبلش من عندك. دارين، سوري، دارين. وحكمل اللي حكيته تماما الآن. المجلس الاستشاري هو بالنهاية أول تجربة بتصير ضمن مسارات التفاوض، فلازم نشوفها كخطوة إيجابية. 2، المجلس الاستشاري كان عم يطلع على جميع الأوراق اللي عم تقدم لطرفي التفاوض ويعمل على أن تكون حساسة للجندر ويركز على هذا الموضوع. 3، هناك خبرات نسوية سورية كان هي مناضلة سابقا ولديها خبرات كبيرة، وضعت هذه الخبرات بالأوراق. هذا الشيء الإيجابي، فهو شكلا إيجابي. الآن مضمونا ماذا فعل، كيف أثر، هنا المسألة. دي مستورة يركز أن هذا المجلس له هو من يعينه، فاسمه المجلس الاستشاري للمبعوث الدولي. لذلك هو يفرض أن جميع الأوراق التي خرجت من هذا المجلس ليست للعلن ولا تنشر بين السوريين والسوريات، وهذا مطب كبير جدا بحيث أن الناس السوريين والسوريات لا يعرفوا ماذا فعل هذا المجلس. لذلك علينا كما سألت ماذا علينا أن نطالب بأن يكون أولا الأوراق الصادرة عن هذا المجلس علنية وبتناول الناس. 2، كما أشارت آن هناك فجوة كبيرة بين المسارات الثلاث 1 و2 و3. يجب على المجلس الاستشاري باعتباره كما عبروا مستوى 1.5 أن يكون هناك يقوم بالصلة مع المسارات 1 و2 و3 لكي يستطيع نقل مطالب الضحايا، مطالب الناجيات، مطالب الناس إلى مستوى واحد على طاولة المفاوضات. السؤال يمكن ما فهمته من محمد تماما، إذا أنا قدرت أفهم أنه نتحدث عن الضحايا، ماذا عن غير الضحايا أو ما هي لا يوجد. يعني أنا من الناس المعتبرة لدى النظام السوري إرهابية، فتخيل قديش مستوى التعامل. إذا لم نحمل السلاح فنحن داعمي إرهاب. إذا كنا محاصرين كما تحدثنا عن الغوطة ومناطق كثيرة فنحن داعمين لمجموعات الإرهابية. لا يوجد إنسان ضحية أو غير ضحية. أعتقد بسوريا الغالبية ما عدا أمراء الحرب ومستفيدين من هذا النزاع هم ضحايا نساء ورجالا. لذلك ولو كنا مدنيين ولو كنا فنحن نعتبر ضحايا. لا يوجد أي ضمانات إذا كان هناك مسألة العودة. نحن نعمل الآن ويمكن فرصة لنا أننا موجودين في مدينة بيروت، نستطيع الالتقاء مع السوريين والسوريات الساكنين في سوريا، نستطيع إعادة بناء جسور ما بيننا وفجوات ما بيننا سواء مؤيدين أو معارضة أو مستقلات. نعمل من أجل سلام مستدام وليس من أجل حل غير مستدام. فمسألة الاندماج ما بين الناس السوريين والسوريات على اختلافهم، أعتقد إذا لم يكن هناك حل سياسي شامل لجميع السوريين، إذا لم يكن مستدام، إذا لم يكن يبني على تشاركية المواطنين والمواطنات في رسم مستقبل سوريتهم، أعتقد أنه مسألة الاندماج هذه شعار والانسجام الاجتماعي وإلى آخره التي تعمل عليها اليوئن للأسف هي شعارات إذا لم نضع نحن ما نريد لسوريتنا. سؤال عمر، الدروس المستفادة ليس عفوا موريس، في بحث على 5 دول نزاع مسلح هي كوسوفو، سيراليون، السودان، غواتيمالا أو بوروندي. هذا البحث كان على قديش مشاركة النساء وشو النتائج إنه ما شاركوا في مسائل النزاع بالحل السياسي. تبين إنه هن استبعدوا استبعاد كامل، رغم إنه في تجارب مثلا بجنوب السودان كان في مشاركة للنساء، بالكوسوفو ولكن عدم مشاركتهم هذا بنى مستقبل. هذا المستقبل إلى الآن مغيبين حقوق النساء، وهذا ما استفدنا منه باطلاعنا على تجربة البوسنيا. الحقوق، المشاركة إلى آخره. أمراء الحرب عندما تجلس على الطاولة ليس فقط أمراء الحرب، أمراء الحرب لا يوجد لديهم حقوق للنساء، وأيضا السياسيين بين قوسين هم أيضا ليست الأجندات والحقوق ضمنهم، فخسروا كثيرا. أيضا تجارب الدول العربية، فلسطين قديش شاركت النساء فيها، وصار في ما يسمى معاهدة السلام ولو بحضور استبعدت النساء والضغط على النساء الآن كما نرى. جزائر كم شاركت النساء فيها. أيضا نحن بسوريا كنا عم نشوف مصر مشاركة النساء بالشارع كبير. اليمن كان هناك شارع مليء بالنساء اليمنيات، تونس إلى آخره. تشارك النساء كثيرا، ولكن عند وضع الحلول تستبعد النساء وأحيانا تعاد إلى منازلهم. هذا ما نعمل. يجب أن تشارك النساء المتمكنات ونعطي فرصة أيضا للنساء كما تعمل النساء الآن ومنظمات كثيرة على تمكين النساء. فإن مسارين مرتبطين، مشاركة المتمكنات وتمكين الأخريات من أجل أن تستطيع المشاركة النسوية جميعا. الدستور، مشكلة المشاكل أننا نقول أن الدساتير السورية قد ضمنت المساواة. بتجربتنا هذا النص الوحيد المأخوذ اللي هو أن لا فرق بين السوريين على اختلاف جنسهم، على فكرة اجت ب 2012 بين قوسين، بال 1970 ما كان في جنسهم. هذا النص اللي هو أنه المساواة بين المواطنين والمواطنات، ما بيستخدموا مواطنين، بين السوريين والسوريات وإلى آخره، لم يكن مادة قانونية نستطيع التعامل معها على تعديل المواد التمييزية المخالفة للدستور السوري. فهي تبقى مادة جامدة، لأنه كما ندرس الآن يجب أن يكون هناك آليات من أجل ضمان أي نص في الدستور على أن لا يعدل إلا نحو الإيجابي، يعني بسموه مواد جامدة لا تعدل إلا نحو الإيجابي، على أن نضمن آليات لتنفيذ هذه. وآليات لدينا خبرة جيدة بآليات اللي وضعتها مثلا تونس من أجل مراقبة المساواة سواء في مؤسسة ولتكن وزارة المرأة أو لتكون في المناطق في الوزارات الأخرى. الكوتا هي أحد الأساليب اللي يجب أن تنص قانوناً على الكوتا 30%. وهذا هذا اللي بتابعه بالمجال. بسوريا لا يوجد كوتا، ومن يتخيل أن وجود 12.4 بمجلس الشعب السوري هو كوتا هو ليس نصاً، هو آلية استخدمها حافظ الأسد ما زالت سائرة إلى اليوم. لا يوجد نص قانوني يؤكد على مشاركة النساء ب30%. فالآليات هي أن تنص وتصدر قانون وأن تكون نصا صريحا وواضحا. وشكرا.
Just add one sentence. Sorry. To Mohammed's question about women, female combatants, women being victims. For me, this is not a binary category. They are not victims because they are not armed, and the ones who are armed are not victims. So it's a binary classification that I wouldn't agree with necessarily. I think that one of the biggest problems that we have is that women are seen as victims, as you said, which I hope was not what came out of what Sabah and I talked about. We do not want to talk about women as victims. On the contrary, we want to talk about them as active members of their communities, trying to achieve change and trying to better the conditions inside their communities, with the best knowledge and the best tools that we can help and provide them with, because this is often what is lacking. But the needs are there, and they know what is useful also for the communities. So I hope that the sort of the tone of the presentation was not to look at women as victims. Obviously, in an armed conflict, as Sabah mentioned, of course, there's a lot of situations in which women are either specifically or especially vulnerable. For example, in terms of sexual violence that was touched upon by Sabah, by the fact that, for example, under sieges, and we saw this in Eastern Ghouta, that women stop eating. They're the first ones to stop eating if there's not enough food for the family, because they would rather have the husband who needs to go out and work eat, and children eat, obviously. So there are things that where women are like perpetually put in the more vulnerable situation, but that for me doesn't make them a victim necessarily. But we are very much trying to push against this narrative to say, no, actually women are active and productive members of their communities, and here's how. Here are examples of women being active and effective members of their communities. And I think this is something that's very important, particularly if you look at the Middle East. I know you are comparing different examples that are slightly also looked at by the international community differently. One of the biggest issues we have with, for example, international development in the Middle East, that we have two main frames in which women are dealt with. One is GBV, gender-based violence, which always forces you to deal with a woman as a victim. All gender-based violence programs that are designed for women have the starting point of victimhood, because we start off with a victim of sexual violence, and it's very hard to turn that around into a powerful empowerment narrative. So what we do is we work from the opposite side. We work with the woman as an individual who has her challenges, and for sure gender-based violence is one of the challenges that women face, but is not a holistic way of looking at her challenges. And sorry, there's just one more sentence I would like to add. Because this is the difficult part if you work on women empowerment from a starting point of victimhood. The second tool that is used in the Middle East for international development programs is countering terrorism, CVE, countering violent extremism, where a lot of international development projects are framed in this. This, for example, includes youth education. It includes also women empowerment, because women are the ones who are expected to keep their sons from radicalizing, keep their husbands from radicalizing. They are the ones who are seen as the positive force in a society, as the peaceful force, but they are rarely ever properly supported to do so. And this is a huge problem that we have with international development perspectives on the Middle East, because this is one of the issues that is seen as a kind of a woman's issue. Women are always framed in women, peace, and security. We're never framed in women, war, and security. That's why when you said you're from the Department of War Studies, I was like, okay, interesting. But there's always this expectation of a woman being the one who is the de-radicalizing force, the peaceful force. But in order to be that, you need to provide the proper support for the women and for the children and for the youth to be able to do that. And this is one of the problems.
Run out of time, so we started a few minutes late, but I think, Doreen, we have to stop now. Yeah. So we can't take any more questions. We'll continue the discussion then informally. So thank you for two excellent presentations.
Thank you.